The call never came. It was supposed to. It always did. Even on his busiest days, even when meetings stretched longer than expected, even when flights were delayed or schedules changed, Jack always called. Always. But that night, there was nothing. Tử Tiên stood by the window, her phone still in her hand, her eyes fixed on the dark road outside as if staring long enough would somehow bring him back, as if silence could be broken by hope alone. "He's late," she whispered. Behind her, Beau sat on the floor, playing quietly with his toy car, unaware of the tension slowly filling the room, unaware that something had already gone wrong. "Mom, when is Dad coming?" he asked softly. Tử Tiên forced a smile. "Soon," she said, but her voice wasn't steady. She tried calling him again, once, twice, 3 times. "The number you have dialed is not available." Her heart tightened. That wasn't normal. Not for him. She grabbed her jacket immediately. "Beau, come here," she said, her tone changing, urgent now. The little boy looked up, confused, but obedient. Within minutes, they were out the door. The night air felt colder than usual, the streets quieter, the world somehow distant, as if everything was holding its breath along with her. She didn't know where to go, not exactly, but she started with the last place he had mentioned, the company, the hotel, the road he was supposed to take. Every step forward came with a growing weight in her chest, a fear she didn't want to name but couldn't ignore. And then, her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered immediately. "Hello? Is this Mrs. Jack?" a voice asked. Her breath caught. "Yes. There's been an accident." The world stopped. Everything. Sound, movement, time. Her hand tightened around the phone. What accident?" she asked, her voice barely holding together. "Your husband was involved in a car collision. He's currently at Central Hospital. You should come as soon as possible." The line ended, but the words stayed, echoing, relentless. Beau tugged lightly at her sleeve. "Mom?" She didn't answer. Couldn't. Because in that moment, everything inside her collapsed. The ride to the hospital felt endless, too slow, too quiet, too loud. Her thoughts spiraled, every possible outcome flashing through her mind, each one worse than the last, her hands trembling as she held Beau close, her body present, but her mind already breaking. "Stay strong," she whispered to herself, not for her, for him, for Beau, for what was about to come. The hospital lights were harsh, cold, unforgiving. She rushed through the doors, her steps uneven, her breath shallow, her heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. "Jack, where is Jack?" she asked the nurse at the front desk. The nurse checked quickly. "Room 312. Tử Tiên didn't wait. She ran. Beau struggling to keep up beside her. The hallway stretched endlessly, each step heavier than the last, until finally, she reached the door. Her hand hovered over the handle, shaking, afraid. Not of what she would see, but of what she might not. She pushed the door open and froze. Jack was there, lying on the bed, alive, breathing, bandaged, but alive. Relief hit her so suddenly she almost collapsed. "Jack," she whispered, stepping forward. But then, she stopped, because she wasn't the only one there. A woman stood beside him, young, well-dressed, her hand gently adjusting his blanket. Her presence, too close, too natural, as if she belonged there. Tử Tien's chest tightened. "Who?" she began. The woman turned, surprised. "You are?" she asked. Before Tử Tien could answer, Jack moved. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then clearer, and he looked straight at her, at Beau, at both of them standing there. For a moment, hope returned. "Jack, it's me," Tử Tien said softly. She stepped closer, carefully, like approaching something fragile. But then, his expression changed. Confusion, blank, distant. "I'm sorry," he said slowly, his voice weak. "Do I know you?" The words hit like a shock. Tử Tien froze. "What?" she whispered. Jack frowned slightly, trying, searching, but nothing came. "I don't remember," he said. Bo stepped forward suddenly. "Dad!" he called out. Jack looked at him. His eyes softened, but still, no recognition. "I'm sorry," he repeated. And this time, it broke something, completely. The woman beside him stepped in gently. "He lost part of his memory," she explained. "The doctor said it might be temporary." Tu Tian didn't hear the rest, because everything else faded. All she could see was him, looking at her, like a stranger. Her legs felt weak, her chest tight, her thoughts shattered, and for the first time, she didn't know where she stood anymore. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling as she looked at the other woman. "I'm Lin," she said. "I found him after the accident and brought him here." Silence, heavy, painful. Tu Tian nodded slowly, but her eyes never left Jack, because somehow that hurt more than anything else. Not the accident, not the fear, not even the unknown, but this, being forgotten, completely. That night, she stayed, even when she didn't know her place, even when she didn't know if she had one anymore. Bo fell asleep in her arms, exhausted, confused, holding on to her tightly as if afraid she might disappear too. And Jack lay there, awake, watching her, not with love, not with memory, but with curiosity, as if she was someone new, someone unfamiliar, someone he was trying to understand. And somewhere deep inside her, a question began to form, not loud, not clear, but terrifying. What if he never remembers? The first night felt longer than anything Tu Tian had ever endured, not because of fear, not because of the hospital, but because of the distance. The distance between her and the man she loved, now measured not in steps, but in memory. Lay there, awake, his eyes occasionally drifting toward her, studying her in quiet moments, not with recognition, not with warmth, but with a kind of distant curiosity that cut deeper than rejection ever could, as if she was someone he should know, but didn't. Tu Tian didn't sleep. She sat beside Bo, who had finally fallen into an uneasy rest, his small hand gripping her sleeve tightly, even in sleep, as if he understood, somewhere deep inside, that something important had changed. The room was silent, until, "Why are you still here?" Jack's voice broke through the stillness. Tu Tian looked up. He wasn't harsh, he wasn't cold, but he wasn't hers. "I'm your wife," she said softly. The words felt fragile, almost unreal. Jack blinked slowly, then looked away. "I don't remember that," he replied. Each word landed like a slow fracture. "I know," she said. And for a moment, that was all there was. Across the room, Lynn stood quietly, observing, her presence calm, composed, almost too comfortable, as if she had already found her place in this unfamiliar situation. "The doctor said pressure won't help," Lynn added gently. "He needs time." Time. Everything needed time. But time didn't guarantee anything. Days passed, slow, heavy, uncertain. Tu Tian stayed, even when it hurt, even when every conversation felt like starting over, even when every look from Jack reminded her that she was no longer part of his past. She told him small things, careful things, not everything, just enough. "We met in a place far from here," she said one afternoon. Jack listened, but his expression didn't change. "You like quiet mornings," she continued, "and you don't drink coffee unless it's too strong." He gave a faint smile. "That sounds like me." But it didn't reach his eyes, because it wasn't memory, it was just information. Meanwhile, Bo tried in his own way. "Dad, look," he said, showing him a toy. Jack looked, smiled gently, but the connection was missing, and that hurt more than anything. One evening, after Bo had fallen asleep again, Tu Tian stood by the window, her reflection faint against the glass, her thoughts louder than ever. "What if he never remembers?" she whispered. Behind her, Lin stepped closer. "He might not," she said honestly. Tu Tian closed her eyes. The truth was harder than hope. "But," Lin continued, "memory isn't just in the mind." Tu Tian turned. "What do you mean?" Lin hesitated. "Sometimes it's in feelings," she said. "In places, in moments." That stayed with her, not as comfort, but as a possibility. The next morning, Tu Tian made a decision. "We're leaving for a few hours," she told Jack. He frowned slightly. "Where?" "To somewhere important," she said. He hesitated, then nodded, not because he trusted the place, but because he trusted her calm. The car ride was quiet, the city slowly fading behind them, replaced by roads that felt less familiar, less controlled, more open, more real. Jack watched the scenery, uncertain, curious. Bo sat between them, holding onto both their hands, not understanding everything, but refusing to let go. They arrived at a small church, old, simple, quiet. Jack stepped out slowly, looking around. "This place," he murmured. Tu Tian watched him, carefully. "We came here once," she said. Jack walked forward, his steps slower now, his eyes scanning, searching, something, anything. Inside, the light filtered softly through stained glass, casting colors across the floor, the silence deep but not empty, filled with something that couldn't be explained. Jack stopped, his breath catching slightly. "I've been here before," he said. Tu Tian's heart skipped. "Yes," she whispered. He closed his eyes for a second, and suddenly, fragments, not clear, not complete. But there, a hand, a promise, a voice, her voice. "I'll stay, no matter what." His eyes snapped open. He turned, looked at her. He looked this time, not as a stranger, not as a question, but as something familiar, something known. "Tu Tian?" he said slowly. Her breath stopped. "Yes." And then, it came. Not all at once, not perfectly, but enough. Enough for him to step forward, enough for him to pull her into his arms, tightly, desperately, as if afraid she would disappear again. "I remember," he whispered. Her tears fell instantly, not from pain, but from relief. Bo ran forward, wrapping his small arms around both of them. "Dad!" Jack held him too, this time, not as a stranger, but as a father. "I'm sorry," Jack said, his voice breaking. Tu Tian shook her head. "You came back," she whispered. And that was enough. But as they stood there, holding on to each other in a moment that felt like both an ending and a beginning, something remained. Not fear, not doubt, but awareness. Because memory could return, love could return, but the space that had existed between them would take time to truly disappear. And as the light shifted inside the church, wrapping around them like something gentle, something forgiving, one thing became clear. They had found each other again, but the journey wasn't over. It had just begun. Again.